now we will discuss about the unit 2, that is friction and its effect. Okay, so suppose if you roll a rubber ball on the ground, then what you will observe, after some time you will observe that it will stop, isn't it? That means it will stop after traveling a certain distance. And if you ride a bicycle, then when the bicycle starts moving with a good speed, if you stop pedaling, then you will observe that it will first slow down and then it will stop, isn't it? So why? So this gives us a idea about retarding force or opposing force, isn't it? Which opposes the motion actually here, isn't it? So this opposing force is called actually force of friction. Okay, friction occurs whenever two bodies are in contact with each other. Okay, and we all know that friction is a consequential force, isn't it? We can give the definition of force friction as a force which acts at the surface of contact when one body moves upon another body is called force of friction. So if I place a pen here and then if it moves like this, then there is a frictional force between this pen, the surface of the pen, and the surface of the book. Okay, so there is a opposing force which opposes the motion. This is actually friction. Okay, so we know that what is friction. So a force which acts at the surface of contact when one body moves upon other body is called force of friction. So now we'll discuss about the types of friction. So three types of frictions are there. One is static friction, one is sliding friction, and one is rolling friction. Okay, so what is static friction? So the frictional force that comes into play when one body tends to move over the surface of another, but the actual motion has yet not started, is called static friction. That means when one body tends to move over other surface, but there is no actual motion, then static friction occurs. Okay, so the static friction does not exist by itself. Okay, when there is no applied force, there is no static friction. That means when we apply some force, then there will be the static friction. So it comes into play the moment there is an applied force. Okay, so when we gradually increase the force applied on the body, a stage is reached such that resultant force on the body is zero and the body remains stationary. But it is just about to slide or roll over the surface. At this stage, the force of friction acting on the body is called static friction. That means static friction is a force that keeps an object at rest, isn't it? So the friction experienced when individuals try to move a stationary object on a surface without actually triggering any relative motion between the body and the surface which it is on. Okay, this force is actually static friction or static frictional force. Okay, so some examples of static frictions are a towel hanging on a rack. Okay, a bookmark in a book. Okay, they are the actually example of static friction. Okay, so another one is sliding friction. So what is sliding friction? The frictional force that comes into play when one body is actually sliding over the surface of the other body is called sliding friction. That means it is the force which is equals to the force required to keep the body in motion over the surface. Now the third one is rolling friction. So what is rolling friction? The frictional force that comes into play when one body is actually rolling over the surface of the other body is called rolling friction, isn't it? So any ball or wheel has rolling friction when rolled on a surface. There are some other examples of items that have rolling friction like bike wheels, okay, soccer ball, okay, baseball. Okay, so now we will discuss about effects of friction. Okay, the first effect is friction opposes motion. We know that this is a opposing force. That means friction is a opposing force which opposes the motion. So we know that an example, when we roll a ball on a ground, then we will observe that after some time the ball will stop, is not it? That means the force of friction occurring in the direction opposite to the direction of applied force, is not it? So for this reason it opposes the motion and tries to stop the body, because the direction of frictional force and direction of the applied force are opposite. So one is friction produces heat. Okay, if we take a 5 rupees coin and rub its one side with table for 10 seconds, and then if we touch the rubbed side of the coin with our hands, then what we will observe? The coin feels very hot. Why? It is because the force of friction between the tabletop and the coin changes into heat energy. For the same reason, if we rub our hands, that means if we rub our palms against each other, then our palms get hot. Okay, so now the third one is friction causes wear and tear. So when we walk, the material of the soles of our shoes wears out due to friction between the road surface and the surface of our shoe, is not it? So for the same reasons, tires of cycles and automobiles wear out due to friction. Okay, we will discuss about advantages of friction. So the first advantage of friction is friction helps us to walk. Okay, we know that it is difficult to walk on highly polished floors or wet grounds or sand, is not it? Why? Because the friction between the surface of the ground and the soles of our shoe is very less here, so that it is difficult to walk on highly polished floors. So we know that if there is no friction between the soles of our shoes and the ground, then it is very difficult to walk, because force of friction helps us to push the ground backward, and hence we move in the forward direction, is not it? So that friction helps us to walk. Okay, so that means the rough surfaces, we know that the rough surfaces produces more friction than the smooth surfaces, is not it? So that it is easier to walk on rough surfaces. Okay, and for the same reason, the tires of different kind of vehicles are provided with deep grooves, so that as the surface becomes rough, then large friction will be there, and so the vehicles do not slip. Okay, and the other advantages are, it is the force of friction which holds nails, screws in the wooden furnitures. Okay, the moving vehicles such as bicycles, cars, scooters can be slowed down and stopped due to force of friction between the brakes shoes against the moving wheel rims. Okay, friction also helps us to write, because when we write on a paper with the help of a pencil or a ball pen, then there is a friction between the top of the pen and the paper, is not it? So that pencil or ball pen can be used to write on a paper easily, is not it? So that means due to this friction, the pencil or ball pen do not slip on paper. Okay, so now disadvantages of friction. So the first disadvantage is friction wears out the soles of our shoes. We know that it wears out the tires of all kinds of vehicles. And second one is the friction wears out the moving part of machinery, because there is a friction. So due to this friction, the moving parts of machineries wears out. Okay, and friction generates heat. We know that friction produces heat. So heat is ultimately one kind of energy. That means as friction produces heat, that means it causes wastage of energy, right? So these are the disadvantages of friction. And now methods of reducing friction. We know that rough surfaces produce more friction than the smooth surfaces. So if we make the rough surfaces smooth, then it will reduce friction, is not it? The streamline shape offers minimum force of friction in air or water, is not it? And this helps the fish or birds to move faster. What is streamline shape? Okay, if you carefully look at a fish or a bird in flight, you will notice that their bodies are narrow in front and then gradually broaden till they again becomes narrow in the tail, at the tail. So this shape is actually streamlined shape.